Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good Thursday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 11th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can always do that with your NOAA Weather Radio or the Marine Band, and you can check out the internet at weather.gov/Alaska or call us on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook during the day. Find us on Twitter, of course, anytime on your phone or your mobile device. And on YouTube is a great way to check in with the broadcast if you missed a part of it, missed the entire thing. Whether you're in the bush, on the road system, or along the coast, you can easily access the YouTube broadcast and check out our daily afternoon weather briefings from NWS Anchorage's account. Simply look for the AKwx TV account from our partner here at Alaska Public Media, and you'll get the entire show later on in the evening. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation now across Alaska. We're mainly talking about the eastern Alaska Range this evening and tomorrow, with gusty winds moving through areas west of Delta Junction and the Toke Cutoff. We expect those gusts to continue as we head through the morning. Some of those could be into the 45 to 50 mile an hour range. Along the Arctic coast, we've been talking about blustery winds and the opportunity for some poor visibility as a result of blowing snow. But there's also going to be some falling snow around the Barrow region. Some of that could reach upwards of 4 inches or so. So these are all winter weather advisories across the northern coast, and those will go through the evening hours into the early morning hours of Friday, and in some cases into the afternoon. So be prepared for changing weather conditions, some blustery winds over 40 miles per hour, and likely some accumulating snow if you're around the Barrow and maybe the AKwx area as well. Here's a look at the overall weather picture, and not a whole lot has changed since we talked yesterday. Low pressure is still sitting across the Gulf of Alaska, and the main weather conveyor belt is pulling storms up from the Pacific Northwest. You can see one of these spiraling here. It's a pretty thing to look at from the satellite's perspective, but if you're on the ground, you've probably noticed a weather change. There's warm and wet air moving back in once again, and the wind should come up a little bit more as we head through the daytime tomorrow. Each one of these weather systems moves up the southeastern coastline into the northern coast and then kind of spreads out its leading edge of weather change out across the Gulf. As it does that, we get rain and clouds, but not a whole lot of that seems to make its way into the interior or really in the west coast. We have other weather systems that are trying to make their way into the Alaska waters. One of them is working its way up across the central Aleutians, and you can see more of those clouds working toward AKwx today as a result of that. Sometimes they travel a little bit further northward, and some of the remnant cloud cover makes it over St. Paul and St. George, and you'll probably see some snow showers when that happens again. In the meantime, out across the Bering Strait, we've got a lot of low cloud cover and cold air. Not a lot of moisture or active weather seems to be working through your way in the form of any of these major weather systems. But things are changing a little bit. We do have a sign that colder air is kind of pooling up here north of the Bering Strait. And an interesting thing is happening on the surface map. You'll see this in a few minutes. Warmer air is still trying to work its way northward, and in the meantime, colder air is trying to mass and drop southward, and that's making another area of low pressure develop in the weather picture here. So we'll have to see what that does. What it did do today, though, as that pattern is setting up, is created a band of snow showers here across the upper Kuskokwim to the middle Yukon and all the way up into the lower Noatak and Kobuk valleys. As a result of that, you'll probably see maybe an inch of snow in some cases there. And so that is that bright band that you see here on the satellite picture earlier today. Here's the weather systems as we have them drawn out on your screen, a 988 millibar low there. That's producing some rainfall this afternoon around Haida Gwaii. Notice again that pressure gradient, the lines here drawn in black representing the change from low to high pressure. They're tightening up across southeast, and when that happens, the winds start to blow a little bit more. Low pressure is drawn all the way into the interior. This is centered up on a 987 millibar low south of Kodiak Island and east of Sand Point. And along that boundary again, that's developing into that system I was just talking about. That's where we started to see some light snow developing today. And in some cases, again, you might see up to an inch along that band. Watch for snow showers around the Chukchi Seacoast. We've got another system here across the southern Bering. Fog in St. Paul, nothing too unusual with that. And of course, a little bit of light rain out in Shemya. As we head into tonight, the weather maker across the Gulf is working northward pretty quickly, and that band of low pressure will start to stretch out across the north and western Gulf. But notice that that frontal boundary here, the leading change of the air masses, warm and wet air to the south and slightly cooler air to the north in this case, is still not quite into southeast. Because of that, and because of the time that it's going to spend sitting right here along this boundary, we'll probably see some higher seas, but we also have a risk for thunderstorms that could develop in isolated fashion all the way from Yakutat and Icy Cape all the way down the outer coast to the Dixon entrance. So if you're going to be out to sea tomorrow or in the area, just watch out for some thunderstorms. If they're in the region, of course, you want to get out of the way fairly quickly. In the central Gulf, the low's down to 984 millibars. That's not terribly tight of a pressure gradient for the northern Gulf, but it will likely bring up the winds across the northern Gulf Coast. And for areas in the Copper River Basin, there might be a little bit more of a breeze. For the western Kenai Peninsula, it doesn't look like there's a very good chance for precipitation at this point. Most of it will be along the coast, along the eastern Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound, and then back into the Alaska Range, where snow showers will be possible once again. You'll notice our weather disturbance across the interior has now formed into more of a frontal boundary. There's a difference between the temperature now, so we've drawn that in with warmer air trying to lift northward, but the colder air is still kind of holding that back from progressing too far to the north and west. And a look along the north coast shows that areas of poor visibility and blowing snow are expected, as well as some snowfall itself, especially around Barrow once again. Out across the central and western Aleutians, snow showers and periods of rain should be expected as you get closer to the Alaska Peninsula and parts of the eastern Aleutians. As we get into Friday, it still looks like warmer air is going to win this battle, at least for now, so the warmer air progresses a little bit more to the west, and once again along that boundary snow showers will be possible. So those on the lower to middle Yukon Valley and into the Noatak and Kobuk valleys might have a better chance of seeing some of that snowfall, and that will again continue to affect the northern parts of the coastal plain, including Barrow. Now, most places along the north coast will likely see blowing and drifting snow with that, so winter weather advisories will continue, especially for the Beaufort Seacoast. A look along the Aleutians shows low pressures working northward toward the chain, and with that, a better chance for showers and a few more breezes there. The winds will switch around a little bit more out across the western end of the chain than what you'll see in the east, at least into Friday afternoon. Notice the stronger southerly flow starting to come in across the north and central Gulf Coast as the low pressure system weakens a little bit more to 988 millibars. And speaking of weakening, the frontal boundary all the way through southeast is starting to fall apart. And that means the pressure gradient probably won't be as tight as we get into Friday afternoon. The wind should settle down just a little bit, and as the air mixes up more, that risk of thunderstorms we were just talking about will start to fade away. For Saturday, another wave of that front is starting to work itself northward once again. You'll see some light rainfall around the Cook Inlet region. Probably not too much again across the western Kenai Peninsula, all the way up toward Kenai and Soldotna itself and into the Anchorage Bowl. There'll be clouds around, but there doesn't look like there'll be a good chance of precipitation. Anything we do see should be fairly light, as we've seen for the last couple days. Rain and snow showers will start to thin out a little bit more across southeastern Alaska. In fact, there might be some breaks where you could get just a quick glimpse of the sunshine if you're around Sitka, southward toward Craig. Low pressure will sit south of Sand Point at 977 millibars. That broad south and westerly flow will add a little bit more moisture out over the open waters of the Gulf, and the winds turn to more of a southeasterly direction coming in across the northern Gulf Coast. Now, look what happened here across the Kobuk and Noatak valleys. Colder air starts to descend further southward toward St. Lawrence Island and the western side of Norton Sound and starts to move eastward. As that happens, that will start to interact with some of the warmer air sitting across the middle Yukon Valley, and there will probably be a better chance for some snow showers there. In the meantime, warmer air is moving offshore and starting to wrap in on the weather system across the Chukchi Sea. With that, we might see areas of fog, flurries, and maybe some accumulating snow across some parts of northwestern Alaska. In the meantime, the pressure gradient and the winds are still going across the Beaufort Seacoast. Watch for continued areas of blowing and drifting snow and visibility that could drop below a half a mile and make it a little more tricky to travel and see where you're going or get back to where you came from. And of course, areas of fog will still be prevalent in that region. Watch for areas of rain and snow showers across the Aleutians. Some breaks in the clouds perhaps north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and south of the Pribilofs. The Pribilofs still looking at snow showers in that region. By and large, things remain unsettled for the Gulf and southeast, starting to get a little more active for the north and west and still stay windy for most of the north coast, and relatively quiet for the interior, as it has been. Here's a look at temperatures now today around 2 o'clock. 40s and 50s for most of southeast. From Sitka southward along the outer coast, we saw highs today easily in the lower to mid-50s. It was a fairly mild day there. Around the capital city, it was 45, 46 around Haines, 41 in Skagway today. Ketchikan, Craig, and Klawock were all fairly mild. Hyder was 39 degrees. Cordova showed 40 this afternoon, 36 around Valdez, cooler still in Anchorage at 33, 43 in Homer, 40 in Seward, and 43 out in Middleton Island, where all the birds are. 30 in Talkeetna. Looked like Cantwell was 32. Denali in the Healy region was around 16, 27 in Fort Greely. Fairbanks was showing 14 with Eagle at 17 degrees and only 9 in Fort Yukon. That was about the same temperature around Arctic Village today, 7 for Kaktovik, but much colder as you get out around Point Barrow and westward toward Wainwright, where temperatures were sub-zero. 4 below in Kivalina today, 3 below in Kotzebue, 3 above in Shishmaref with 8 above in Nome. Looked like it was 14 in Unalakleet, 0 in Galena today. Tanana was closer to 5. Grayling 12, and many areas west of the Alaska Range saw temps in the lower to mid-teens along the Kuskokwim Valley, all the way out toward Bethel at 12, 18 in Nunivak Island, and temps were in the single digits for St. Lawrence Island for Gamble and Savunga. Now for Kodiak Island, temps were in the upper 30s on the northern end, down around AKwx. It was only 45. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula today, with Sand Point checking in at 43, 39 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, mid-30s for both St. Paul and St. George, as well as Adak and Atka, and 34 in Shemya today. Now, overnight low temperatures will hover in the 20s and 30s. Not a big change for South Central and the Susitna Valley, down into the mid-30s for Kodiak Island, 30s and even mid-40s for parts of Southeast today. And tonight, the capital city back in the mid-30s. Fairbanks, you're looking at about 18, 4 below in Fort Yukon. Temps from 5 to 15 below across the Arctic coast, a little milder around Kaktovik, maybe 3 above there. Nome, you're looking at 1 above, southwest in Bristol Bay in the mid to upper 20s. As you get into the Alaska Peninsula, we're back in the mid-30s, and St. Paul near 32 tonight. For highs tomorrow, 36 there, 40s for the Alaska Peninsula, 41 in Kodiak tomorrow, South Central and Anchorage, looking at temps in the upper 30s, closer to 40 for Seward and Homer, Prince William Sound in the upper 30s and lower 40s, southeast upper 40s to as warm as 50 degrees around places like Ketchikan and Craig. 19 in Fairbanks and milder for you, 5 below in Barrow, 4 below in Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Everyone working up there will see another sub-zero day easily, and it will be windy and again with dangerous visibility at times. A winter weather advisory will be in effect. 16 in Nome and southwest, you're looking at teens and 20s north of the Kuskokwim. As you get into Bristol Bay, temperatures for you will be fairly close to freezing, if not a little bit warmer. For Dillingham, look for a high in the upper 30s. Flying weather now shows IFR conditions along the north coast, as you would expect. With blowing and drifting snow, IFR conditions are expected from Point Barrow eastward. And for areas west of Yakutat into Prince William Sound and all the way down the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula into the Barren Islands, in fact, IFR conditions are expected there. Many parts of southeast should be under MBFR conditions. There may be some improvement, hit and miss throughout the day. And then west of Adak, you'll see IFR conditions along the Bering Sea coast as we go through your afternoon. Pass conditions look like this. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we both expect to see MBFR conditions prevail. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass may see some improvements during your Friday, but we'll start at IFR for sure. Rainy Pass, we expect to see improvements in a major way up to VFR conditions perhaps by the afternoon. Windy Pass also leaning over to visual flight rule throughout your Friday. Isabel Pass, we expect to see improvements to VFR throughout the day, and Mentasta Pass will probably go the other way. Look for a start around VFR for your Friday morning, and IFR conditions are expected to start in Tanita Pass with VFR conditions later in the day. Portage Pass again with the moisture in Prince William Sound, we're going to call IFR on the eastern side. And Chilkoot and White Pass may see ceilings and visibility improve throughout the afternoon as the moisture starts to thin out. Freezing levels show the surface freezing line just north of the Pribilofs, but otherwise very much unchanged across the northern and eastern Gulf Coast. The warmer and wetter air is spreading out along that frontal boundary as it lifts northward. Freezing levels as high as 6,000 feet just south of the Dixon entrance and 4,000 feet just west of Sitka. You can see that spreading out to 2,000 feet as it heads toward the Barrens, Kodiak Island, and Bristol Bay. Icing potential certainly there with frontal boundaries just swinging up into the Gulf one right after the other. The moisture's there. At times there's enough cold air, but those levels are about 6,000 to 8,000 feet before you get into a chance for isolated moderate or even occasional moderate around parts of the southern Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait, and even Prince William Sound. For southeast, look for that condition to improve during the day. Above 4,000 feet, of course, west of Point Barrow, and then with moisture and blowing and drifting snow across the lower levels, visibility may be more of a problem as you head into the Beaufort Seacoast. The jet stream shows some changes occurring, and it's something to note. As we get into about a week and a half to 2 weeks out, there may be an opportunity for our pattern to become more of a colder one than a warmer one we've had for a large part of the winter. The weather conveyor belt's taking a dive southward, and with that, colder air is moving eastward a little bit more. You can also see the main track of the jet stream to the east of Alaska is allowing more of that cold air to move into the lower 48 states. But we see that trough that's been sitting out across the Gulf of Alaska kind of flattening out a little bit more. So it will be interesting to see in the coming days what develops out across eastern Siberia and starts to inch toward Alaska. If we get some cold air on the move, well, at this time of the year, colder air likes to win. At 9,000 feet, southerlies are working across the Gulf. You can see them slowing down as you move over the interior, 15 to 30 knots there. A south and easterly flow over the Beaufort Seacoast picks up to 45 knots and then drops down and slows down over St. Lawrence Island and becomes more of an easterly wind wrapping into low pressure across the northern Pacific. Wind speeds over southeast around 20 to 30, across south central 15 to 20, and across the west at 9,000 feet 20 to 25. At 3,000 feet, another little low pressure system shows up on our map, and this is creating a faster flow at this level. At 3,000 feet, the winds crank up to 55 knots just outside of the Copper River Basin and the Delta region, coming into the eastern Prince William Sound area. On the south side of the low, they're considerably slower. So if you're flying, let's say from Sitka to Yakutat to the eastern side around Cordova, let's say, you're going to encounter some pretty fast winds at this level. For most of southeast, winds are a little tamer at 20 knots, mainly due south. For the middle and upper Yukon, 10 to 15 from the south and southeast. Faster flow once again across the north slope at 50 to 55, and then slowing down as you get out toward the west coast with the north and easterly wind coming off the YK Delta at 20 to 25 and 20 to 25 knots wrapping around low pressure across the North Pacific there. Here's a look at turbulence, and as you would expect, again, with faster winds across the north slope, we find at least a chance for some light moderate, maybe occasional moderate across the Beaufort Seacoast and then north of the Bering Strait, generally below 4,000 feet. Also across the North Pacific and the Gulf, below 4,000, a little bit of chop there outside of the Copper River Basin and over the central Aleutians. That's a look at your aviation weather. I'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine forecast. Stay tuned.
Long-awaited Moon Joke episode.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky.
And this week to share some space jokes, specifically about the moon, since you'll be able to see it after dark each night this week.
Dean's been wanting to do this forever, so just humor him.
We have some gems like what holds up the moon?
What?
Moonbeams, of course. I've got a million of them.
Well, more like 5 or 6 of them. And as we wax on about the moon and show you what's up in the sky, we know that your interest will not wane.
Let's show you.
So, how does the moon cut his hair?
I know, eclipse it.
One of the worst jokes ever. But that makes me think about eclipses. And although we had 4 total lunar eclipses in the last 2 years, we won't be having another one until January 31st, 2018.
I hate waiting that long for an eclipse, so luckily there will be a solar eclipse before then. Mark your calendars for August 21st, 2017. That's when the new moon will slide in front of the sun and block part of it out.
This eclipse will be easy to see across the entire lower 48 states. And if you happen to be in the right place at the right time, on a narrow path between Oregon and South Carolina, you can see a total solar eclipse. That's when the new moon blocks out the entire sun.
Imagine going outside and the sun is gone, replaced by a perfect black hole. It's a little scary if you're not ready for it, but it is the most amazing experience in astronomy. Do not miss this one.
Hey Dean, why couldn't the astronauts stay overnight on the moon?
Why?
Because it was full.
Oh, groan.
Grown? Really? Anyway, we will have our next full moon on February 22nd. You can see it rising in the east just as the sun sets in the west that day.
Okay, James, how do you know when the moon's going broke?
How?
It's down to its last quarter. When the moon appears halfway lit up, we actually call that a quarter moon. It sounds confusing since how can a half moon be a quarter, but the name really refers to its motion around the Earth.
On the night of February 14th, you can see the right half of the moon lit up. We call that first quarter since it has traveled 1/4 of the way around the Earth from its new moon phase.
On the morning of Leap Day, February 29th, you'll see the left half of the moon illuminated. We call that third quarter or last quarter, and it'll be near the planet Mars. Yep, we went a long way for that joke.
So Dean, what did you think of the restaurant on the moon?
The food was great, but it has no atmosphere.
That is true, actually. Unlike the Earth, the moon has no significant atmosphere. So when the Apollo astronauts visited the moon, they had to wear spacesuits like these. Hey, there's Buzz Aldrin. Hi, Buzz. Hey, Buzz.
James, he can't hear you. Remember, there's no air out there.
Oh, yeah.
However, Buzz and 11 other astronauts walked on the surface of the moon between 1969 and 1972. Buzz Aldrin described the moon as magnificent desolation, and it certainly is desolate. Everywhere you look are dark-colored rocks and more dark-colored rocks. I know the moon seems bright, but most of the moon rocks are the color of asphalt.
On the last 3 Apollo missions, astronauts brought up moon rovers to drive across the lunar surface. The rovers were battery-powered and could each reach top speeds of 8 miles per hour. You can't drive that slow on Earth, or else...
Or else what?
Or else you would have to apologize. So, every night this week, check out the moon after dark.
Get a group together and moon gaze with friends and family. And if you want to organize the best star party ever, we have some words of advice.
You better plan it.
Definitely don't moon it. Keep looking up.
Here's a look at today's sea ice edge in just a second. Okay, yes. Just so you know, we've given the rest of the week off to the Stargazer crew there. That was pretty rough. Here's a look at sea ice edge, and it looks like the concentrations are increasing from northeast to south and west, and we've been watching St. Matthews, kind of a little benchmark that we have out there in the middle of the Bering as to where the ice edge is, and you'll notice that all week it's been creeping southward ever so slowly, and as the flow increases a little bit more from the east and maybe even from the north later on, as we head into next week or the following week, we'll see that ice edge probably increase further southward and maybe a little bit faster. In the meantime, not a whole lot of change in Bristol Bay or in Cook Inlet. Didn't get a good view on the satellite picture today, so not a whole lot of confidence in the analysis there. But anytime you want to check out where the concentration is, the movement of the ice, or the outlook, you can go to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php for the expert analysis for the Alaska waters. Here's a look at southeast now. South and easterly winds will be the predominant flow for Friday in the inside waters, 15 to as high as 30 down in the Clarence Strait. Notice we've got that slight risk for thunderstorms across the outside coastal waters. Wind speeds pick up from 20 in the south to as high as 35 knots from the east outside of Yakutat with a 19-foot sea. For Saturday, we've taken out the chance for thunderstorms for now. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal, southeasterlies 20 to 30 as you head down towards Petersburg, Ketchikan, and Metlakatla, 25 to 30 in the outer coast, and seas ranging from 10 to as high as 12-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance. For south central, northerlies in the Cook Inlet over the ice. In the open waters, 4 to 6-foot seas, 6-foot seas west of the Barrens, and those diminish a little bit as you head into Shelikof Strait. Northeasterlies down to 15 inside of Prince William Sound. East and northeasterly winds for the north and western Gulf. And during the day, the winds will switch around to more of a southwesterly flow east of Kodiak Island, 15 knots with a 9-foot sea. For Saturday, the winds become more easterly across the north and western Gulf. Easterlies still at 15, but switch around to more of an easterly flow inside of Prince William Sound. 3 to 4-foot seas inside of Cook Inlet, and 6 to 7-foot seas as you get closer to Shelikof Strait. This all for Saturday. For the Alaska Peninsula and inside of Bristol Bay, light easterly flow at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea continuing down the Bering Sea coast. Southerlies from Castle Cape to Chignik with a 7-foot sea, and we'll expect similar sea conditions there as you head out toward King Cove on an easterly wind at 20 knots. For Saturday, east and south winds there across the Pacific coast. Look for more of an easterly flow for Bristol Bay and all the way down the Bering Sea coast. 2 to as high as 5-foot seas expected there on Saturday. For the Aleutians, for the central and eastern chain, an east and northeasterly wind developing there for Adak and Atka, all the way out toward Unalaska, where you can expect a 6-foot sea offshore, 7 to 9-foot seas there along the Pacific coast, and north and easterly winds from Kiska to Attu with a 20 to 25 knot wind and 8 to 9-foot seas. Those come up to 10 feet from Kiska to Attu on Saturday with a 25 knot wind from the north and west, and we'll keep the winds about the same for the central and eastern chain, 15 to 20 as you get into Saturday afternoon, with seas running around 6 to 8 feet on the Bering Sea coast. For the west coast, a northerly flow coming across St. Lawrence Island and over the ice at 25 knots. Northeasterlies continue for St. Matthew with a 9-foot sea there, 3-foot seas outside of the Kuskokwim Bay, a 20-knot wind, and look for 6-foot seas around the Pribilofs, also looking at a northeasterly flow at 20 knots. For Saturday, pretty much the same thing, 20 to 25 knots in all areas. You'll see ice over regions north of Nunivak Island, 4-foot seas now in Kuskokwim Bay, 7-foot seas around the Pribilofs on a 25-knot wind, and about the same conditions there for St. Matthew, looking for an 8-foot sea there until you get into the ice, which is still north, about 50 to 60 nautical miles north and west of St. Matthew. For the north coast, look for easterlies from Barrow all the way out toward Kaktovik, 30 to 35 knots. I wish it was only 2-knot winds there, but that's more like 25 for Point Lay on a northeasterly flow, and northerlies outside of Kotzebue Sound with a 25-knot wind. For Saturday, 30 to 35 knots across the north slope. Again, over the ice, that will likely reduce visibility at times. Northeasterlies around the Chukchi Seacoast and northwesterlies coming into Kotzebue Sound on a 20-knot wind. Recapping tonight's weather, wind advisory is posted for the eastern Alaska range, generally west of the Tok Cutoff, so it will be breezy and blustery there. And winter weather advisory is posted for the Beaufort Seacoast, all the way from Point Barrow eastward for poor visibility and at sometimes falling snow. Expect a couple inches of snow to as much as 4 around the Barrow region. Low pressure in the central Gulf is bringing a slight chance of isolated thunderstorms across the outer coast for southeast tomorrow. Otherwise, it's just rain and clouds for most around the Gulf Coast communities. Precipitation will be fairly light, if at all, for anywhere else except for the coastal regions, but snow showers may pick up along the lower to middle Yukon and the Noatak and Kobuk river valleys as we get into Saturday. Watch for periods of rain showers across the central and eastern Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula going into the weekend. And thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.